Our fifth video is on the Berlin Conference in the Congo Free State, and we'll cover events taking place in the Congo River Basin from 1884 through 1908. We need to pick up the story where we left off in video 4. If you recall, Leopold II hired Henry Morton Stanley and a team of explorers to coerce tribal leaders into signing away the rights to their people's land. Stanley did not disappoint. By 1885, Leopold had 450 treaties and a legal claim to land along the Congo River and its tributaries. Leopold was not alone in his push to claim land in Africa. Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, they were all pushing inland from the traditional slave fortresses established centuries before. For example, if you want to look closely at the map, Germany pushed northwest from here. You have the British pushing north from South Africa and south from Egypt. The French pushed northwest from just north of the Congo and also from Senegal. The British also controlled the Niger River Valley. In addition to all this, old colonial powers such as Portugal pushed east and west here. This all led to a new problem for Europe, a problem that Leopold helped cause as the Europeans raced to claim as much of Africa as possible. They started to bump up against each other. For example, skirmishes broke out between the Belgian and the Portuguese just south of the Congo here. This is all what historians now call the scramble for Africa. The fear among the great powers, including Britain, France, and Germany, was that they would be drawn into a world war over territory in Africa. This fear led the leader of Germany, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, to host a conference in Berlin that lasted several months. This became known as the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. At the meetings, representatives of 14 different Western countries met, couched over maps of Africa, and they systematically divided up an entire continent amongst themselves. Again, the goal for Europeans was to avoid a war with each other. They did not concern themselves with avoiding conflict with the actual Africans living there. No African was present at the conference. In fact, the attendees at the conference made a concerted effort to divide the continent in a way that would separate different ethnicities and tribes, keeping the people of various colonies weak and divided. In addition, the Congress made provisions banning the sale of certain weapons directly to Africans. The Congress was well aware of the problems that a well-armed, unified opposition could cause. Here's a map of Africa after the Congress. It's hard to underestimate the importance of this meeting. It shaped not only the colonial possessions for the next 80 years, but also the independent nation states that emerged out of these colonies in the 1960s. A modern map of Africa, therefore, originated from a group of Europeans meeting in a smoke-filled room, ignoring the natural, tribal, linguistic, and cultural boundaries of Africa. African nations are still dealing with the problems that these arbitrary borders created. Now let's switch our narrative back to Leopold II. The Berlin Conference was a huge success for the Belgian king. His representatives left the conference with the major powers of Europe officially recognizing his personal control of the Congo River Basin. The name that they gave Leopold's possessions was a bitterly ironic one. It was called the Congo Free State. In reality, it was neither free nor a state. And here's an important distinction. Where the governments of Britain, France, and Germany conquered and controlled the various colonies, the Congo Free State was a private possession of Leopold II's. Technically, the Belgian government had little to do with the control and governance of the colony. What was life like in Leopold's Congo Free State? To answer that question, you have to understand the importance of rubber. In addition to the ivory and the gold that can be found in the Congo, rubber grew naturally in the rainforests. It actually grows from a sap that you find in vines along massive trees in the jungle. To collect the sap, people would have to somehow climb up these trees, cut slices into the vines, and then let the sap drain into buckets. Once the sap has been collected, it can be refined, which is a process of heating and cooling until the sap turns into a material that you would recognize as rubber. By the 1890s, Leopold controlled the world's largest source of rubber, and he developed his own private militia dedicated to forcing local Congolese into collecting this rubber sap. That militia was called the Force Publique. To elaborate on exactly how the Force Publique went about the business of collecting rubber, a passage from the Encyclopedia Britannica may be helpful. I quote, "The regime under Leopold's unrestrained personal control became notorious for its treatment of the Congolese. Beatings and lashings were used to force villagers to meet their rubber gathering quotas, as was the taking of hostages. One method employed by Leopold's agents was kidnapping the families of Congolese men who were then coerced into trying to meet work quotas, which were often unattainable, in order to secure the release of their families. Rebellious actions by the Congolese elicited swift and harsh responses from Leopold's private army, which was a band of African soldiers led by European officers. This force publique burned the villages and slaughtered the families of rebels. Force publique troops were also known for cutting off the hands of the Congolese, including children. This mutilation not only served as a punishment and a method to further terrorize the Congolese into submission, but the severed hands also provided a measure by which the soldiers could prove to their commanding officers that they were actively crushing rebellious activity. Notice that these two men are holding severed hands. Brutality was widespread in mines and on plantations. The population of the entire state of the Congo is said to have declined from some 20 million people to 8 million people. That ends the quotation. Leopold's control of the Congo is one of the greatest crimes of modern history. It rivals the genocides of the 20th century, and that includes Hitler's Holocaust. How did the story end? Well, as Britannica writes, quote, "The truth about Leopold's brutal regime eventually spread, largely owing to the efforts of the Congo Reform Association, which was an organization founded by British citizens and missionaries in the early 20th century. Finally, indignation among people in Britain and other parts of Europe and the United States grew so great that Leopold was forced to transfer his authority in the Congo to the Belgian government. In 1908, the Congo Free State was abolished and replaced by the Belgian Congo, a colony controlled by the Belgian government. Unfortunately, the tragedy in the Congo did not end in 1908. The details of the Congo's continued struggle with Western imperialism, however, and also its internal division, that's a story for another unit.